based in Dubai. I cover the MENA region, Singapore, and South Asia. We're here to cover how COVID-19 has impacted college-bound students and how we can help you with the application process this fall. We're going to be giving you updates today, as well as answering some of the questions you've sent us before. If you would like to answer any questions during this, please post them in the comments section and we'll try our best to get them. Now, before we go into the discussion, we want to take one step back and just remind you of how colleges evaluate students. We at IvyWise believe that students are evaluated based on a rubric, which is going to show up on our screen. Here we are. Now, the rubric is based on hard factors and soft factors, which we're going to be going into today. Some of these hard factors and soft factors have been affected by COVID-19, and we're going to be speaking to you about how can you address them in the coming months. We do feel that colleges are not dramatically going to change how they evaluate applicants, but rather are going to be accommodating the current situation today and in the months to come. Before we dive into our discussion and I hand it over to my colleague Christine, I just want to remind you to like our Facebook page and take a look at our blog post, because that's where we're going to be updating all the developments in the coming months. I personally check it out every day to see what the current news is. We also have a free resource on our website for students who are going to be applying this fall, and you can see it right below me over here. Now I'm going to be handing it over to Christine, who's going to be talking about the most important factor of the...
Hi, everyone. My name's Christine. I'm one of the college admission officers counselor at IvyWise. I was a former assistant director and admissions officer at Yale University and Georgetown University. I'm very happy to be here with you, all of you, virtually today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. This is obviously a very important topic to many of us, students in particular, and families as well. And with all these changes, it's really important to stay up to date. So we're very happy to be here to join you in discussing some of these changes and potential changes. I want to begin with talking about the academic component of the admissions rubric grades and how that's been impacted by the admissions, the COVID situation on the admissions process. Grades are the most important because that's where admissions readers, all of us at IvyWise admissions counselors, we were admissions officers once, and that's what we would do when we were looking at an application, is go to the transcript to look at the strength of a student academically. We look at the courses they've taken and their grades as well. In our current situation, we know that schools across the world are closed temporarily, and we do hope that it will be open soon, but we don't know when. None of us really know. We do know that grades have been impacted for this particular spring term, whether your school is on a trimester system or semester system or a year-long system. With the closure and going distance learning, it will be different, and schools are responding in different ways. From what we've heard of our own students, some schools are going to place a greater emphasis on fall grades. They may go to a pass and fail system for this current spring semester. Other schools understand that students have already started this current term or current semester, so they will place an emphasis on the work done prior to the school closure. So it may be an average of the two quarters within a semester and term. So there are many different ways that schools are responding to this in particular. And this is impacting students across the board, not just 11th grade students who will be in the admissions process this fall, but students across the board, including 9th grade students, 10th grade students, even 12th grade students who are graduating this year. They're wondering how that may be impacted, as well as college students, so across the board. And that's something to know if you're concerned about what's going to happen in my particular situation, is that all the students applying will be impacted. An admissions officer will definitely take those contextualized circumstances into consideration. The admissions process has always been very contextualized. When I read applications and I looked at transcript, I would always try to get to know a particular school and their context. What's their curriculum? What are the toughest courses offered? Often, many admission offices have regional admissions director who's responsible for a particular region. So if you are in Dubai, or you're in another part of the MENA region, or in Hong Kong, or in Washington, DC, where I am, they seek to understand your school in that particular situation. And of course, more so than ever this year, admissions officer will read into that particular context. What happened at your school? How long were you closed? How did your school decide to respond in terms of the grading system? Did you have access to your teachers? Was it online? Was it interrupted the entire time? So all those questions will be very contextualized. So I want to assure students, and that will be how it will be considered in this fall. Admissions officers may decide to rely more on fall grades that were printed and assume that students will continue the same trajectory they've been always on. If students been on an upward trajectory since the 9th and 10th grade, they will perhaps assume that this will continue as well. We've always advised students that the fall semester of their current senior year or 12th grade year would be very important. And I believe that will be the case this year as well, as colleges may want to see how students fare in the beginning month of the fall term. Of course, again, depending on whether schools are open in the fall, that could be adjusted as well. So context is important. Colleges admission officers will review students holistically in that sense and consider their special situation. The other component I want to address beyond grades and the transcript will be the students' test score. Test scores comprise another hard factor. Grades and transcript, those are what we call hard factors. Test scores will be another component of in terms of hard factors. And of course, more than anything, I think this is where it's been really interrupted. Schooling has been interrupted, but we just got word even on Wednesday that the June SAT and subject test will be canceled across the board. The College Board just made that announcement. And so there's been a lot of development starting in March on the US side, where we were getting notifications that the March SAT was impacted in the US globally, and then it was May, and the ACT responded with the April ACT being rescheduled to June. So there are a lot of development happening on this particular front. In fact, the ACT is announcing that they're doing a flexible scheduling option for students during the summer to accommodate the testing process. And these organizations, we know, considering a range of options if the situation continues where testing in a on-site might be impacted, that they're looking into online take-home options for students, perhaps in the fall and into the winter. So they are doing their best, I'm sure, thinking through the different options and making sure that students are able to do what they can. And in this context, too, we know that students who are on studying with the AP curriculum, the APs have been impacted. So hopefully, if you are in an AP curriculum, you will receive notification from your school and the College Board as well. That it will be take home 45 minutes. And the College Board has provided online live classes for students to help them prepare as well. The schedule has been released. So it will be a very interesting situation for everyone to see how this take home situation works, and that how may impact future testing for other tests and environments as well. In light of all these changes, understandably, colleges are responding. And so far, dozens of colleges and universities have announced they will be test optional, meaning they will not require students to submit the SAT or ACT score if they are applying this particular fall. So it's going to be a test optional environment. Not all colleges made that announcement, and some are still saying that they will require the SAT and ACT. So it's important to just stay up to date on this. And we are at IvyWise keeping track of all the development that's coming out. Pretty much every single day there's some announcement, especially on the testing front, and we are keeping track of that. And we do have a list of all the test optional schools for this admission cycle. We don't know if this test optional policy will last beyond this current upcoming cycle. Some schools have announced it will be a 2 to 3 year trial period, but we don't know if it would be a permanent policy. But we do know things are changing. Subject tests have also been de-emphasized. Right now, no US university is requiring them, but a number of schools, they still have a policy of recommending subject tests for students to submit. Again, in this very changed world where students may not be able to take their next test until August or later, the colleges will be understanding in terms of their particular situation. But given, I think, all these changes, and especially with the test optional testing, there's a lot of questions that we've been getting from students. So I want to turn over to my colleague, Rachel, right now. Rachel will talk a little bit about what this test optional situation may mean for students.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I've worked as a counselor at IvyWise since 2014, and prior to that, I was an assistant dean of admissions at Swarthmore College. So, as Christine said, we're seeing a lot of colleges and universities more and more every day announcing that they will be test optional for the upcoming admissions season, really in direct response to the limited availability of future test dates and the cancellation. So, we do anticipate that more schools will adopt similar policies for the upcoming admissions cycle. I did want to share a little bit about some insight into reasons why test scores are important to schools. One of the big factors is that they do play into colleges and universities' overall rankings. So schools that can report high test averages for admitted and matriculating students ultimately receive more points towards an overall ranking and their selectivity. So the fact that schools are moving to test optional, whether it's permanent or temporary, is not just an act of compassion for students. It also shows that the school has evaluated whether the work of requiring students to test outweighs the benefits of them testing. And they have ultimately decided that the benefits of standardized tests right now is just not enough to outweigh what is ultimately potentially a burden of testing for students. Schools also know that they are likely to receive more applications when they move to test optional. And in theory, they will be able to kind of take the hit of having fewer test scores to report. Similarly, the testing averages actually will go up potentially because students who do submit have higher test scores. So schools do stand to benefit from going test optional. So I think that's important to kind of be aware of. There are a lot of factors at play when schools are making these big policy choices. It's possible that, we are potentially seeing a sea change or at a tipping point in kind of evaluating what role standardized tests will play in college admissions. But for now, what we know, I think, is that it is important to still test if you can. So taking a test, having scores to submit will give you'll have all the options. You'll be able to submit applications to all schools. So if you can test, it's important to do so. If testing is not available to you, that's okay. You will not be penalized for taking advantage of test optional policies and not submitting scores. It is important to note that test optional doesn't mean test blind. So if you submit scores, when students submit scores, the colleges and universities will be looking at that and they will be taking that into consideration. So Natasha is going to talk a little bit more about some of the other factors that admissions committees will be taking into account.
Thanks, Rachel, for that, and Christine. So now we just want to go into the soft factors, and we have to remind ourselves that the US application process is holistic. So the universities there look not only at grades and your test scores, but also at the soft factors that you'll be submitting, like essays, recommendation letters, as well as your extracurricular activities that you're doing. Now, when we could take that into consideration and we think about the fact that we might not be submitting test scores this coming fall, and some grades might even be pass-fail, we do think that universities might be looking at the soft factors even more importantly this fall. So when you think about that, things like demonstrated interest and informed interest and your application strategy are going to be extremely important this fall. Application strategy might even change this fall because early decision and early application might be pushed back because colleges are aware that students might need a little bit more time to prepare. So taking that into account, I'm going to move this now to Christine, who's going to be talking about one of the most important soft factors, the essay.
Thank you, Natasha, for that. Yes, so the essays have always been an important part of the application process. As Natasha mentioned, the U.S. admissions process, unlike other countries' universities, is very holistic, and we do consider students' personal qualities, how they think, and what they value and what they've accomplished. All these go into consideration in the evaluation process. So essays are definitely a way for students, and it's always been a way for students to show a different side of who they are, something that we cannot learn about them from just looking at their application, the hard numbers, like their test scores or transcript, or even their activity. So we do really value the essay component. And I think in this very impacted world by the pandemic, the essay portion, the narrative, the personal story will be all the more important. One question that we've heard from students already is that, should I be writing about the COVID-19 situation, how I'm impacted specifically? I think given the context that it is a global situation, we from IvyWise perspective do not believe that that would be the perhaps the best topic for students to address in their college essay. We do recognize that it's a very important situation, and students are very, very impacted by that, and colleges will recognize that. From all the webinars and conference calls I've participated in since the COVID-19 situation, it seems that admission officers will be very aware of that, and there are even discussion of creating perhaps an additional space in the application for students to kind of note a little bit what happened to them in that regard. But for the main essay that students are writing, we do still recommend students to consider aspect of who they are that they want to share, that they cannot share otherwise in their application. So really be thoughtful, be reflective. When I was at Yale admissions office, that's what we've always shared with students, and those are the essays that always stood out at the end of the day. Essays that are thoughtful and reflective. So I would just encourage students to keep thinking and reflect on who they are and what they want to share from that perspective. In addition to the main essay, most likely when students apply, they will be writing other additional essays for the specific colleges that they're applying to. Those are what we call the supplemental essays. And I think that will continue to be a very important aspect of the admissions process as well. And this is where students can really demonstrate their interest in a particular school, but really and talking about the distinctives of various a particular university and college, and why that is drawing a student to that university, courses, programs, activities, professors that can work with, research opportunity. So a lot of things that can go into these supplemental essays that could really help students to demonstrate their interest, particularly in our current situation when students may not be able to travel to a particular campus and visit to demonstrate their interest in that way. There are other factors too. There are other soft factors like extracurricular activities. And for that, I'll turn back to my colleague, Rachel, to speak more about extracurricular activities.
So one thing that's important to note about activities is that all activities are on hold or interrupted for everyone right now. So in a way, we're kind of all in the same storm. Admissions officers know this, and I think they really want students to know that these interruptions in regular activities will not be held against them. So as you think about how to report your activities and talk about some of these interruptions, one option might be to utilize the additional information section of the Common App to elaborate on gaps in your activities list if you want to. We may see that the Common App or the Coalition app will add components to their applications to address things like this, like Christine mentioned. But if you feel like there's really something that you want to share, something you had planned and intended to do that you weren't able to do as a result of these interruptions, there will be places within the application to talk about that. I think ultimately, there's always a lot to consider when it comes to activities, and this is no exception. On the one hand, some students may find themselves with more time and more options right now to perhaps get creative with extracurricular pursuits and to continue to explore their interest in new ways from home. So on the one hand, I think it's important to try to be as productive as possible. On the other hand, though, we also know that there's a lot to manage right now. It's an emotional time. There are a lot of things that we may have previously taken for granted or relied on that are now in flux. So I think students shouldn't put too much pressure on themselves right now during this time. So really kind of striking a balance between finding new ways to explore the things that you love, perhaps finding new things, and also trying not to put too much pressure on yourself and recognizing that, again, everyone's kind of weathering the storm together. I think that the best thing that students can do is to try to continue to do what they've done as best they can. So, moving the Lit Mag submissions to an online platform and then making the magazine digital this year. Showcasing kind of how you respond to the crisis might ultimately be evidence. of problem solving and, evidence of dedication to what you do. So right now, continuing to do the things that you've already done, and then perhaps, trying to find things that you actually enjoy, and doing them in ways that you can account for. So for students who find themselves with more time to do a little reading for pleasure, you could start a blog and review the books that you're reading. You could record a musical performance or a reading of a children's book, and share it with friends and family, or put it online for people to see. You could send letters to the elderly through organizations. You could make masks. You could distribute a digital recipe collection. I think that there are new ways that perhaps hobbies may be kind of viewed as like tried and true activities for students in a way that perhaps they weren't before. So if you can, find ways to report and account for your time, and also move over the things that you were doing kind of into this new kind of virtual world that we're living in, I think both of those things will ultimately help in how you report your activities and how you spend your time. I think a lot of this also applies to summer programs. So Christine's going to talk a little bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for that. So in terms of summer programs, I think one of the things that I really just appreciate Rachel highlighting is that the context matters. So however you are able to respond in your current situation is really important. Colleges are going to look for that. In fact, the word that I've heard from some admission officers is the word nimble. How are you nimbly responding to your situation? And I want to encourage students to think that, the school year is not discrete and needs to stop whatever you're doing. And then the summer begins and you do a different set of activities. Whatever you happen to be doing currently in your situation, you can definitely continue into the summer. That blog that you've been working on, that musical that you've been writing, all those things you can definitely continue into the summer as your summer activity and being productive. And that's what colleges are really looking for in any situation is, are you being productive, making the best of your time? Are you engaged in your learning? Are you contributing to your community, both in school and outside of school? And this is true for the academic year as well as for the summer. However, we do realize that for the summer, students are impacted in the sense that there are special summer programs. Many students are hoping to be at a university campus studying, and now some of these programs have been canceled or they're going virtual. And so whichever situation you find yourself in, if you had applied to a program, you were accepted, and now the program is canceled, there's still other ways that you can really make a productive summer. Or if your program has been made virtual and you think it's still a good fit for you, you were really interested in economics and you had signed up for an on-campus course studying the stock market, and that's virtual now, of course, feel free to continue with that option, as many university wants to still make that learning experience available to them. It's important to them, these programs, and they want to keep that going as much as possible. So definitely review your situation. At the same time, I do also want to just encourage students and reassure them that you don't have to do one of these summer programs or summer camps. You can find other ways to learn deeply about a particular subject. A number of college courses are made free through these platforms, what we call MOOC, MOOC platforms like Coursera and edX, Yale Open Courses that you can take for free and still learn a lot about a particular subject. So feel free to do that. Other students were looking forward to perhaps be engaged in a summer internship or summer job, and now that's no longer an option. One, perhaps because the company that you were hoping to work for no longer is making that an option. Again, there are other ways. Rachel highlighted a lot of creative ways to engage in your personal pursuits, your academic pursuits, continue that into the summer. But if your opportunity on the other end, the company says, great, we will try to make it work virtually, I think that's a great opportunity to continue to do that. Ask if you can still attend meetings virtually. Ask if you can work on a particular project. Ask if you can do research for your company. So there's still ways, even if you can't be on site to do an internship or job, then you can continue to make this summer productive. At IvyWise, we are helping students through their summer options. I know that's coming up very quickly and things are changing. So we are offering summer program consultations, so where we can work with students more specifically in your individualized context based on your interests, what's available, what you can and cannot do. So if you're interested in working with us through these options, definitely let us know. Natasha would be a great person to contact, as she's our regional director and representative, and she would be able to help you get started with that process if you're interested. Another, I think, speaking about campuses, college campuses being closed, another way that students are impacted through the situation is that they're no longer able to visit a particular campus this coming summer or into the fall. And I will turn back to my colleague, Rachel, to speak more about college visits and how can you research colleges virtually.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. So the closure of college campuses and the resulting cancellations of visits and information sessions is definitely a big blow to current juniors. And spring break is a hugely popular time to visit, and it's almost a rite of passage for students as they enter into the college admissions process. So I want to acknowledge how disappointing I think this must be for many students. With that said, now is still the right time to start researching schools. So it's important that you try to continue to learn about colleges of interest as best you can. There are options to do this. Many schools offer virtual tours on their website, and that's a great way to get an initial look at a school. You can really take as many as you want. So take this time to kind of cast a wide net and explore and participate in some virtual tours. And if a college that you're particularly interested in is offering a virtual information session, definitely register for one. So one thing that we're going to see is that schools that have tracked demonstrated interest, the level and amount of how a student is engaging with schools, their representatives, their materials. Schools that have done that in the past are going to continue to do that as a way to gauge students' interest in whether or not they'd be more likely to matriculate should they be admitted. So that's not going to change, but the ways in which schools are tracking that interest and what qualifies as demonstrated interest may change. So I think you can also sign up for email lists and even go one step further, not only sign up for the email lists, but open the emails when they come, click on the links. This is a way to engage with a school virtually. And again, for the schools that track demonstrated interest, they will definitely take notice. Gathering all of this information now, I think could really enhance your college visit experience if you are able to visit schools this fall or whenever that may be. So it's definitely worthwhile to do that. And now is still the right time. All of this is impacting students around the globe, especially international students for whom the US admissions process is already competitive. So for international students planning to apply this fall, they're also dealing with canceled test dates. And on top of that, travel restrictions and potentially visa delays. So there may be, more hoops to jump through for international students in the college admissions process. So I would really advise international students to closely watch how schools, especially schools that they're interested in, are supporting international students in the years to come, starting this fall. So if schools move to distance learning this fall, are they taking time difference into account? Do students have to, attend an online class, or are they able to watch a filmed lecture? What new or current policies are in place if colleges end up needing to close again? Are international students able to stay on campus? Would you want to stay? So really paying attention to how schools are supporting international students, I think will give you a good sense of what your experience as an international student might be. So it's really critical for international students who are planning to apply to colleges in the US to develop a plan for applications now. And that includes, watching very closely for available testing, as always, a balanced college list with varying deadlines, and then a good understanding of what your options will be on college campuses in the years to come. So now I'm going to pass this off to Christine to explain how all of this will impact how applications are read this fall.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. So thinking back to the kind of actual application process. I think the first thing to really note that is that admission officers are human. Rachel and I both were admission officers, former admissions officers. So we read applications, we sat on committees, we had very good discussions about our students that we were reading about and learning about who they are and presenting them in committees, and committees have great discussions about what they're looking for in students and the type of student that they want to bring to their particular campus. So that's something to keep in mind, is that admissions officers, sometimes the process seems like a black box, but the readers, the committee members are real people, and they're experiencing this too. They're at home, they're working from home, and they have families that they're living together and working through this pandemic situation. I recently read a blog post by a Georgia Tech admission officer. So this is in our state of Georgia, and she said, I see you. What she's trying to say is, I see the applicant, I see you students working. And there was a particular image, she said, of working at the dinner table, sharing a computer while you're working with your parents. They do see students, they care, they're very caring people. So to be assured of that, I know that sometimes, again, it seems very mysterious, where does my application go after I push the submit button? But real people are reading this, and real people are evaluating students. And I think more than ever, earlier I mentioned the context matters, and it is a holistic process. So every component will still matter in this context. And they were going to look at you and your international situation, in your school situation, what happened, how did student respond. The rubric itself that we presented at the very beginning, when Natasha was presenting, and we showed all these different components, the hard factors and the soft factors, that rubric will not change. We don't believe so. We've been part of many conversations with admission officers and college counselors, and from everything we've learned so far in the last month, more than a month, that we do not believe the rubric itself will not change. Even test scores, it's test optional, but students can still submit. I think what will happen will be kind of changes and adjustment within this rubric and different emphasis depending on what students are able and not able to submit, or how disrupted their activities were. So that context, the holistic process, will become ever more important. Just as a quick example, I can imagine a situation where if the grades are not there this spring semester, that the admissions reader may really lean not only on earlier grades and the fall grades perhaps, but recommendations from teachers. So recommendations have always been important, perhaps even more so in this particular context. Admission officers are always very keen on learning about students' activities and passions. It's disrupted this year. So they might lean toward the essays to learn more about why students are passionate about economics, or why they're passionate about serving their particular community. So again, different components of the rubric may play a bigger role this fall than other years, but certainly we think that the rubric will stand as a whole. And for students who are right now 11th grade students, who are getting ready to apply this fall, I'm going to turn back to my colleague Rachel to talk about specific tips that she has for all of you who are getting ready to apply, and what can you do in the coming weeks and months to be as prepared as possible for your application season.
All right, thanks, Christine. So if you're planning to apply to college this fall, here are some things that you can do to stay on track. I think the biggest thing you can do is stay engaged in your schoolwork. So this is the best thing you can do to maintain your performance, perhaps even, kick it up a notch. Your transcript is still going to be the most important part of your college application. So staying engaged, taking advantage of, extra sessions that your teacher might offer. These kind of things will not only help you, with your grades and how your academic strengths are reported, but it will also be helpful for recommendations. As I said before, trying to find ways to make the activities you enjoy work within the current circumstances is another important thing to do during this time. So that might mean, having virtual meetings, for example. So really try to keep the things that you do, try to keep them afloat. Another important factor will be to continue with your test prep. So use the time that you have to continue preparing for tests. Many schools are still going to require test scores or allow you to submit test scores. Continuing to test prep and staying on top of that will allow you to be prepared when additional test dates are added, if that happens. And then another thing to consider is that many tutors, including IvyWise's test prep experts, offer virtual lessons so that students can continue to learn remotely. So if you're considering tutoring, you're still able to do that. So definitely continue with test prep. Doing virtual information sessions and visits is going to be another important thing to do now. A lot of schools are hosting actual virtual information sessions where you can watch a real-time presentation, get your questions answered, just as you would on campus. So really taking advantage of that and using that information to kind of build and refine a school list. So again, now is the right time to start doing this. You want to make sure that your goals align with what the schools expect and what they require. And that, as always, you should have a balanced list of likely target and reach schools. And if you can, try to remain flexible. So we're just seeing so much change. There's so much in flux right now. It is hard to plan. So try to do so. Build a school list, participate in these things when you can, and then try to remain flexible. There's actually a lot of kind of legwork you can do right now when it comes to actually working on your college applications. So for some students, this is perhaps a little too far off, and they might not be ready to think about the actual college application right now, and that's totally fine. But for those who are, it actually is a good way to kind of get ahead. We know that the college Common App is not going to change any of their essay prompts. They're not going to change their platform. So you can actually, create a Common App account and become familiar with the platform. You can brainstorm some essay topics. You can work on a rough outline of your personal statement. You can take a look at the activities section and start thinking about how you want to present your extracurriculars. All of these things, I think we recognize that, of course, writing your essay, for example, 650 words, that's a lot. That's going to take some time. But we don't always recognize, or students don't always recognize, how much time a lot of this kind of logistical information reporting actually requires. It requires a fair amount of time. So if you can kind of get in there and start doing some of those things now, I think that will, ultimately provide you a bit of a head start and also give you a sense of what is required of you. So we do typically advise that juniors start working on their college applications the summer before senior year. But with so many students at home right now, it could be the right time to kind of get going. So Natasha is going to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that. Very informative. I'm going to hand it over to Christine now, who's going to be taking care of our question section. Many of you have submitted questions to our Instagram and to our blog, as well as live right now. So we're going to be addressing that. Christine, will you take it over?
Great. Thank you, Natasha. So do take a moment to put into the comment box if you have any specific questions, and we'll try to get to them as best as we can. As Natasha mentioned, before our event, we did receive a number of questions on Instagram and through our blog. And so we want to address some of the more common questions, and definitely we'll try to get to your live question as well. So do let us know. I think on the topic of testing, I know that's still lingering because the test optional concept is very hard. We're so used to just, you have to submit something. What does it mean that you have the option to submit or not to submit? I think for students who have test scores, are able to test, once again, I think it's a good idea to do so. Earlier, I mentioned the APs. This year, AP exams are going on. So if you're part of AP curriculum, continue to study hard because AP scores are optional in the admission process, always has been, but colleges do expect students to have AP scores if they're taking AP course. So if you can and do well on the AP exams, even in the abbreviated at-home format, I think those scores can still indicate something, even if your schooling is disrupted. So again, it has to be contextualized. How were you impacted? But those scores can't be part of the process. You can also receive credits for these AP scores, perhaps depending, again, this is going to be university to university policy. So far, the UCs, so the University of California system, they've said that they will continue to accept scores from this year's AP exams as they've always done. For international students who need to submit language proficiency tests, such as TOEFL and ITSO, again, continue to look through the college their policy on these tests. What I'm seeing is that the ACT and SAT may be optional for international students, but some schools are still requiring the English language proficiency test. So again, if you're able to take the TOEFL, it's at home. Please try to do that to the best that you can. So for those who have scores, are able to take scores, I think those are helpful. But for students who absolutely cannot because of particular situation, because technical difficulties, because you absolutely cannot. Colleges will understand, and they understand, or you may not have at the time to prepare because all the cancellations, etc. So the context is going to be important, and colleges will really consider that as they're reading your application, whether a score is there, what kind of score it is, or whether the score is not there. I will turn over to my colleague Rachel to talk about sort of student, how can they care for themselves in all aspects of well-being in the situation where they're at home with their family and studying, and parents are working, and how they can achieve that good balance and healthy balance.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I mean, it's such an interesting question and such an important topic. Often when I'm working with students and asking them to do things, to write about certain topics, to make certain considerations, I think about how I might do that myself. And so one thing that I've tried to do during this time is just to do one thing a day that I can be proud of. So one thing a day that feels good. So for me, that might be, I'm lucky enough to have a backyard that I can go in. So doing a little bit of gardening. I baked bread for the first time. So I'm seeing steps towards mental health as and protecting your mental health as kind of trying to take the pressure off and to step away from what is certainly a very stressful time. And I also think that these things could potentially work their way into a college application. So it's not completely isolated. I think you should be able to kind of write about these, kind of happy activities that you're able to do every day. So trying not to stress too much about what things have looked like traditionally in the past with regard to your schoolwork, your grades, your activities, your clubs, and thinking about what they look like now. There may be just a little bit, hopefully a little bit less pressure because, we all are weathering this storm together. And I think there will be a lot of compassion from admissions readers. So kind of being aware of that, trying to step away from the stress and just do one thing a day kind of for yourself. Reading a book, taking a nap, watching a movie, just to do something that feels good, I think is a great way to protect yourself and to kind of take care of your mental health during this time.
Great. So we are going to turn to some of your live questions that we want to address, just being mindful of our time as well. So feel free to continue to submit questions. One question from Jenny, I thought this is a good one to address in regard to the Common App about the prompts, whether or not they will be altered, and especially in light of the COVID-19 situation. And I think Angela kind of echoed that in saying that there have been rumors of whether or not there will be a separate prompt from COVID as well. I think, and again, we don't know how the Common App will respond or other application platforms. The Common App specifically usually, quote unquote, launches its new application on August 1st during our summer here. The prompts were for this coming year, for the 2020 and 21 application year. The prompts were released or announced earlier this year, and they're the same as the prior year. Will there be a different prompt, perhaps, or whether it's a prompt or just additional space, or colleges themselves add a different section for COVID response? I think we recognize that students want to contextualize their situation, and there are places for that. But at the same time, I would just caution students about using their main essay on the COVID situation. This is a global impact. So as an admissions officer, a former admissions officer, Rachel and I used to read thousands of applications, sometimes, just dozens and dozens per day. Imagine, again, we're humans, so we want to take the context into consideration, but yet another COVID-19 essay, yet another COVID. And so I do just recommend students to think broadly about what you want to write for your main essay. So, that's what we do at IvyWise. We spend a lot of time with our students working through brainstorming. So I would still recommend students to do that, but recognizing at the same time that you do have an important story to tell, perhaps about your COVID-19 situation, and that is important to who you are and how you've been impacted. And we do hope there will be a space for students to share about that as well. So hopefully your voices will be heard. We recognize that Rachel and I are not making decisions, but we're part of these forums where people are decision makers and they're hearing this and they're responding. So they do recognize the human element of it, but at the same time, just from an admissions perspective, application reading perspective, we've been there. We want to just encourage students to think about your full story, not just, in terms of writing, that you do present yourself in a very compelling, personal way that we can learn all about who you are. So that's a great question. Another question, and I'll turn to Rachel for this, is Hemant asked, for students who, especially international students, who might be considering both UK and US admission, given all the disruptions, testing, even perhaps, again, we don't know, it's not been announced in anywhere, but what if, let's say, that early admission in the US will be pushed back or postponed? How can a student who may be in a situation of applying to both countries or even other countries manage these disruptions?
Yeah, such a great question. It does remain difficult, I think, to plan because we just don't know what the fall is going to look like. But I think what that means is it's more important now than ever to kind of take advantage of this time, or at least get started now, to do what you can so that when you have the information you need to kind of take the next step, you are in that place. So I think, working on your college list now, so to determining what schools you want to apply to, being familiar with what those requirements are, knowing that it is perhaps subject to change, but likely not that much. Having a really wide understanding of all of the requirements, I think will be helpful in making sure that you're able to meet deadlines, because we do hear rumors. People are wondering, will deadlines get pushed back? What is that going to look like? And we just don't know yet. So I think doing what you can to familiarize yourself with requirements, even going into applications and starting to fill things out now. These would all be things you'd be doing potentially this fall. If you can do them now, then perhaps in the fall you'll have more time to address some of these changes. So those are some things to think about, I think, now.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, Rachel. Another question from Jay. Jay asked about the Common App and other school applications, whether or not if you are a dual citizen and many students in an international context are also U.S. citizens, how does that impact financial aid for students applying? The kind of short answer to that is it doesn't impact if you're a dual citizen. Yes, the citizenship questions really for financial aid for U.S. citizen. If you're a U.S. citizen and you have dual citizenship with another country, it should not impact your financial aid process. You would be considered a U.S. Citizen in that regard. I think it kind of drawing out from that question a little bit. I know working with Rachel and I, working with international students all these years, a question is, well, if I'm in an international setting, I'm an American citizen, how am I read? Am I international? Am I US? What policy applies to me and what doesn't? From an application review perspective, you're read again in your context. So if you're going to school in Dubai and you are an American, you have American citizenship, you are not kind of plucked out of your Dubai context and put into a US, where you were born in California situation. Applications are always read in the context of where the high school is. So you may be a transfer student in high school and you started school in America and then you ended up in Dubai. You will be read in the Dubai kind of application pool, but you're not considered an international student in the sense that you are clearly, you've had American education. So it's really that context that's important. Or we can have a student who is not a US citizen, but has attended an American international school all their life, or they consider international or American. I think in that context, they recognize the student's citizenship as international, and they have international background, family background that's international. That's wonderful. That's diversity. But they're also educated in the US education system. So that perhaps their expectation of their English language proficiency to be on par with a quote unquote an American student. So again, the context is very important in this process. Another, I think, aspect of students, on the topic of financial aid is how does this all impact students, in this kind of uncertain economy that we are facing right now? So does that impact my financial application? How does financial status affect my application status? And again, I think universities are feeling, sort of all of us are feeling the economic impact of what's going on. So they will be making, decisions. I think they're just really taking it one day at a time, making the ones that are immediate, addressing the class of 2024 that's been admitted, and whether or not now they're looking at the fall, if the social distancing continue, universities are thinking very closely about whether or not they're going to be online or they can hold in class. I think everyone wants to be in person in class if possible. But again, that's uncertain, and their financial status is uncertain for some universities. And I think that's all the more reason to just stay on top of news and development, because universities are, in the US at least, they're not one kind of membership and they all make decision for everyone. They're individual institutions and they make individual decisions. And we've always known that universities welcome diversity, international students. IvyWise, we love working with international students because of the perspective and the stories and narrative they bring, and I think they will continue to value that. Many international students are full paying. That means that they pay the full tuition if they have the financial ability to do so. And American universities, many of them recognize that and will continue to recognize that, I believe, in this coming season. So even despite the travel restrictions and uncertainty in regard to that, I believe that the process will go on. I think the message here is context is important. It's a holistic process. The rubric probably will not change. And I do not believe the financial evaluation process that's been in place for years prior to this will change significantly. But given the development of the pandemic as we're experiencing it now, even in mid-April, as it continues, hopefully we will be able to, the universities will make clear policies, if specifics are impacted, and make the adjustment within that kind of rubric and context. I see another question, and we'll address that. And if you have one more final question, we'll have time for that, and then we'll close up and after that. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your questions. Angela asked, we spoke on grades, and it's a huge concern to many students and how they will be compared to other students. Some are continued grades, or some, including third quarter, some are pass-fail entire spring semester. Is there any other tips or advice that can calm this anxiety? That's such a great question. I will. Rachel, would you want to kind of speak to that, about how students can really just kind of breathe in this moment, given all this disruption?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it really is. I mean, I think we're seeing, and Angela did a great job kind of showcasing all of the different ways that schools are responding to this. So it's going to look different across the board. And I think that colleges and universities are anticipating that. And I would imagine that really the burden of sharing that information is going to fall on the high school. That the high school is going to have to do quite a bit of work, I think, to share how they've made choices, what choices they've made. I imagine updates to, high school profiles, perhaps additional inserts, or pieces of recommendation letters from counselors, detailing all of this. So I think that the high schools will do, I feel confident high schools will do a good job of sharing not only the decisions that they made, but how they arrived at those decisions and what it looked like for them. And I think colleges also, when they have questions, colleges don't hesitate to reach out to counselors, reach out to principals, reach out directly to high schools. So if there is something that is unclear about a certain transcript or kind of how things came to be, I think colleges will do their due diligence in making sure that they have the answers that they need. So I think that there will be a lot of information sharing between high schools and colleges. So I hope that for students, they can kind of, exhale and know that the institutions that are working for them and will do their due diligence in sharing, how decisions were made, what that looks like for students, and how that, indicates kind of their academic potential. So, there is still a lot of unknown. There are going to be a lot of different things that schools are doing, but I don't think that students need to stress about how that's being shared. I think what students need to be thinking about is just doing as well as they can in this setting, and making sure that they're engaging in their schoolwork. So that's what I would say. What do you think, Christine?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I was just right before we came on for a live event, I was reading an article and that said called the asterisk semester, the little star that we see in next to. I think this is more than any other, used to be that a student had a particular extenuating circumstance. Let's say they had a health crisis in the family or themselves, and then semester grades were not what they are, or they had to some blanks, it's an asterisk semester. And so I think that's now kind of a global context, is that we were all managing what we have here. Just to share personally, in Virginia, in the US, our systems, schools abruptly ended on March 13th, and students were just said, don't come back tomorrow. And then they were trying to do distance learning, but our system crashed. So students haven't been learning for a month. And these are high school students who are in the process of doing APs, and you can't even access your teachers. So I think this is a global situation, and the asterisk semester will be more so than ever. So I think Rachel's absolutely right. We do not want students to feel any more anxious during this time. So do the best that you can in your situation. Your resilience, I think, more than anything, will speak to who you are and your character and your strength through this process. So hang in there. We understand, all of us understand that it's a very tough situation. So just to kind of close us, I think Mona had a question, and Haman had another question all about the kind of the grade situation. So we'll just kind of close on those two questions, and then we'll turn it to Natasha to close us out for this event to share some final thoughts. Again, the grade situation is institution by institution. I think, I just cited one example of our school system here, my local situation, but all of us across the world were experiencing different situations. So it is really one by one, school by school decision about what's being done, or district by district, depending on if you have more administrative units or where you are. Mona asked a question that, it's always been known that 9th and 10th grade grades weigh less than 11th year. Will the same come to grades again? So I think that one is for current students, 11th grade students who are about to apply, they will look at your 9th grade and 10th grade grades. And if you always done well, the assumption is that you will continue to do well. There's no doubt that, a student who has always been on top of things would kind of all of a sudden, or even if they do, they're not worried. Yeah, you have to adjust where you are. You have to adjust your mental health or just well-being. And so even for, great student to kind of, they need to take that breathing moment we just talked about this semester. It will not, I do not believe, as a admissions reader, I would not want to penalize that student. You will always been a good student. You will continue to be a great student into college. For students who are on that trajectory, so 9th grade was a little soft, 10th grade is getting better, 11th grade, what happened to this semester? I think they will look at fall grades, where it's students, where your last set of real grades before the impact happened. And they might, and again, it's the situation by situation, every applicant is different. That's the kind of individual process. They might want to see fall grades if school is happening in a regular situation context where students are able to return. So again, it's more than anything, it's an asterisk. It is case by case. It is contextual. They might look at earlier grades, and they might look at coming grades. And so we don't know at this point. That's kind of our best, sort of, without kind of crystal clarity of the crystal ball, this is what we think might be how it's played out. So thank you for staying engaged with us. Thank you for your question. And thank you for just tuning in. We know that it is trying times for all of us, and so we really appreciate it. I will turn over to Natasha for just some final thoughts on all of this and our event today.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Rachel. Super helpful, very informative. I want to thank all of you out there for joining us. I know it's a very strange time for us to be connecting this way, but we're lucky at IvyWise to be a virtual firm. So our work hasn't really been interrupted. We're here for you. We're there for you. We have a ton of resources on our website. Please do check out our blog post. We have a free resource for students who are going to be applying this fall. Please do use that. And we're always around to answer any questions you have. You can always reach me at natasha@ivywise.com. Keep well, keep safe, and take care.